Hey everyone, and welcome back to World History. Today we're going to start on a new unit. We're beginning our talk on the classical age of Rome. So Rome is a really interesting classical age, and we're going to actually spend quite a lot of time talking about it because it's so interesting. But before we begin, I want to remind you about some important things. So first off, our central question is, how did the Roman Republic create the foundation of what we call the West? Think about that question as we kind of go through and learn about the Roman Republic and kind of what it meant to modern day society. As we go through, also think about our three different symbols. If you see the star, that means most likely this is a TEK or a standard. You see the little human brain, means this is prior knowledge, something we have talked about before in some way or another. If it's the bell, most likely this is going to be on a test. Think about these three concepts as we go through the chapters. So first off, before we talk about the Roman Republic, let's talk about the origins of Rome itself. So Rome began with this concept of the Roman myth. First off, Rome was, what is modern day Rome? Is a beautiful piece of land. It was an ideal land for civilization to develop. It had easy travel through different rivers and ports. It had plentiful, fertile land that was really easy to grow on, and it had very warm, easy climate that made it very receptive to agricultural efforts. There is a myth that kind of is the beginning of Rome, the Roman tradition, that there was two brothers, Romulus and Remus, and they are twin brothers of the god of war, Mars. They were abandoned as babies and raised by a she-wolf, and then they were taken in by farmers. The myth goes that they were very strong and capable because of this, and they ended up wanting to build a town for themselves, and so they split the town and began building walls, and one brother, Romulus, actually ended up killing the other brother, Remus, and forming Rome after himself, Romulus. So some believe this to be a factual event, while others believe this to be myth. But really what it is, it's an origin story. It tells us a lot about who these people were and what they believed in. Their founding father was the son of Mars, the son of war. So war is going to be a huge part. They were raised by farmers, and they were raised by a she-wolf, which means they cared about nature and about agriculture, about farming, and other things like that. All of this plays in to tell us exactly what Rome cared about and why that was important. So early Rome, probably what actually happened is early Rome was a group of Latin tribes that was conquered by a group called the Etruscans, and they were kind of a Greek influence group, and they ruled over the Latin tribes, specifically over what would become modern day Rome. And what happened is these early Romans began to adopt this culture. They had a lot of Greek influence. They adopted Greek alphabet. They adopted Greek dress, such as togas, military tactics, agriculture, and even developed early sewer systems based off of the Greek model. This would be important as we kind of go on, because the Etruscans had kings, and these kings were often tyrannical, and they had heavy tax burdens, especially on the conquered Romans. And the Romans had a group called the Patricians. The Patricians were rich Roman nobles who very much disliked these kings who would often make them pay extravagant taxes, and they considered them to be a proud generational leadership group. In 509 BCE, the Roman Patricians actually rebelled against their kings and formed their own group, which would become the Roman Republic. So this origins of the Roman Republic, first off, they developed a new type of government, a republic, and republic means res publica in Latin, which means public things. And so what exactly is a republic? Well, a republic is very similar to a democracy. It's elective leadership with a citizen vote. However, instead of electing yourself or electing people in the citizenship, you would elect representatives who would be kind of in charge of voting on your behalf. So these representatives would vote in passing laws and electing leaders. So why do they want a republic and not a monarchy or a democracy? Well, after being controlled by the Greeks for so long, they really did not want that. They considered kings, they had the word for king was rex, which was considered a slur or a slang or a bad word. They didn't like it. They didn't like kings. They didn't want another king. And so they formed a republic instead. This would be very important to early Roman social structure. So you had two main groups. You had the Patricians and the Plebeians. The Patricians were those Roman nobles, elite society, wealthy landowners, primary citizens who voted, held office, and created laws. The plebeians, on the other hand, were pretty much everyone else. Merchants, craftsmen, farmers. The only one below them were really slaves. But however, these plebeians would often become indebted to the patrician, especially when it came to agriculture growing, and they would be forced to work in the army and be laborers, and it often caused a lot of discord between the two groups. In 494 BCE, the plebeians actually resisted and revolted against the patricians and basically said, "You don't give us equal treatment, we're not going to do any of your work for you. So we're not going to join your armies, we're not going to work in your laborers, we're not going to make you crafts things." Basically, one of the first people to try to riot or to strike against, "We won't do your work for you if you don't give us better rules." And so they basically rebelled and they asked for a tribune, which was an official in ancient Rome chosen by the plebeians to protect their interests. And so this tribune would be the person to say whether or not the patricians could do or not do something based on whether or not the plebeians liked it or not, which kind of helped balance out that government just a little bit. Laws for all. So they established this idea and they developed what's called the 12 tables, which is very similar to Hammurabi's code, was a written set of laws. They protected the rights of citizens, told criminal and religious crimes as, and just kind of gave a basic overview of the laws of society. They also developed a constitution, which kind of like how we think of a constitution was a written set of instructions and laws that would develop over time. However, one of the big things about the Roman Constitution is you never took anything out. So they would just add laws and layer them on top of each other every year. And so you would just have layers upon layers upon layers of laws that a lot of times contradict each other. They also believed in 3 branches of government. They had basically a split very similar to how we today, and with a legislative, judicial, and executive branch, though not quite the same, different concepts. And we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly is broken into. And the Senate was not really for the people. So they had a Senate, a Congress who kind of made laws, but even though they were supposed to represent the interests of the peoples, they often were corrupt and did things in their own way. The big thing that the Roman government believed in was this concept of senatus populatis Romanus, what is the Senate and the people, which means basically that the government was for the Senate and for the people, for equal representation. It did not work out that way, but that's what their ideals were based on. So actually, how is this government broken down? So first off, you have the Centurion Assembly, which was basically a group of wealthy patricians who kind of ruled, and they elected officials and served as judges. And then you had the Tribal Assembly, which was that tribune, which was citizen rule, and they elected tribunes who had veto power on Centurion's assembly laws that were put together. You also had 2 counselors. So these were magistrates with imperium, or power to govern, and they had terms and balance of powers, and there's a lot of rules involved. They had other offices as well, census censors who were elected, and as well as the proctors who were judges. And so basically you ended up having 3 branches of government, right? You would have the judges, the Centurion Assembly, you would have the Congress, the Tribal Assembly, and then you would have the executive branch, the 2 consuls. It didn't work exactly that way, but basically it was supposed to help even out the power and kind of balance and check it in place in this republic. They also had another concept, which was a dictator, though it isn't how we consider a dictator today. So this dictator was one of the consuls who would, in times of trouble, step up to become absolute ruler and have firm power. And basically, it was if there was something really bad that was going on and they needed someone who kind of like to take charge and lead, this person could do that. The idea was that they would take power until the crisis was averted, and then they would return it back to the people. And actually in 45 458 BCE, Cincinnatus actually did this. There was a big crisis and a war, and for 2 weeks, Cincinnatus took control, was the dictator, got everything in order, organized it all, and then gave back power. We'll find out later on that that's not how it ended up working in the long run, but the idea was that if there was something happening that they absolutely needed someone to rule and not have any fighting or assemblies or voting, this is how they would do it. Rome also had an amazing army, and as the need for resources grew, because these Roman cities became so big and there's not enough land to be farmed, there was too many people, and so they were like, we need more resources and goods so that none of our people starve. And so basically this army would go out and they begin conquering. And so first places they conquered was what is modern day Italy and Greece. And they did this in a number of ways. They had a very powerful army for two main reasons. First off, they had a very disciplined plebeian soldiers. So soldiers were very dedicated and loyal. It was believed that a good soldier and a good citizen was loyal to the Republic, loyal to Rome. Another big thing is that they actually improved on the Greek phalanx, which we talked about before. It's this like very structured group that used shields to protect themselves. And Rome did something similar. So the biggest downfall of a phalanx was its sides. It had these long open sides, which made it easy for other groups to kind of get in. But what Rome did is they actually turned it into a triangle, which kind of made that impossible. It had shields all the way around, and therefore you never had any blank spaces. They also structured their army very well. They broke everything into legions, which were about 3,000 to 500 foot soldiers. And these legions then had centurion units. And these were 100-group soldier units that would form together, live together, do everything together to form harmony. And they would form these phalanx-type centurion units. And they would have a centurion leader, one leader over 100 soldiers who would kind of be in charge of what that group did. And it was very important, and it helped kind of create a lot of loyalty, like I said before, as well as a really structured and organized military. Made it really easy to pick up and go fight and then come home and go back to farming, which made it a great army to conquer and then, you know, have resources that they needed. This would go into what we call the Punic Wars. So as Rome was conquering, there was another big city at the time called Carthage. We've talked about Carthage in the past with the Philistines. The Philistines developed Carthage as a conquered settlement in North Africa, and Carthage would actually bloom into a huge and beautiful city, and it would have a lot of wealth and power. And basically Rome saw how much wealth and power they had, saw how much resources they had, and basically said, if we were able to take that, we would be good. We wouldn't have to worry about if we had enough resources or enough materials, we would have it all. And so basically Rome was like, okay, we're gonna fight them. And what was really interesting is Rome's biggest thing is their army. They have a very strong army. Carthage didn't have a strong army at all, but an incredible navy. Rome didn't even have an navy at all at this time. So in the first war, Carthage was hugely ahead. They were much stronger, had more money, more power, but somehow after like 15 years of fighting, Rome ended up winning the first war. And they basically signed it, okay, we'll give up, and they let it go. Later on the second war, about 10, 15 years later, there was the leader of ancient Carthage called Hannibal. Hannibal was like, you know what, I'm gonna swear revenge against Rome and what it did. And so Hannibal took, like, I think it was 50 or 60,000 soldiers, and instead of trying to hit them with their navy, he went around and went up the Alps, which are these huge mountains, and basically said, we're going to go through the Alps, and we're going to take war elephants, and we're going to take soldiers and infantry and horses and all of these men, and we're going to go over these winter Alps, take 2 weeks long. Hundreds and thousands of soldiers are going to die, but they made it into Rome completely by surprise and decimated. And for 15 years, basically Hannibal and his soldiers decimated Rome. He went through city to city to city, killing people, destroying cities, conquering and conquering and conquering, and then miracle by miracles, Rome somehow beat them back out at the and after 15 years of fighting, beat them out of Rome. Shortly after, Carthage became really, really weak politically after the second loss at the Second Punic War loss. But they were slowly coming back, slowly gaining more prestige. And Rome saw this and they were like, we don't want to wait for them to come back to power because then they're going to attack us again. So they were like, we're going to attack first. And this time, Rome was in the lead from the very beginning, had a lot more power and influence, and they basically decimated Carthage. And they made sure, you know what, we're going to make sure there's no more fourth war. They burned down all of their cities and enslaved all of their people. And we're like, we're done. We're done attacking us and we're taking over. And so basically in probably what was a 25-year period of time, Rome conquered all of this and conquered everything and basically said, we will take over. You're not having any part of this anymore. And so basically after this, they're like, well, if we could conquer them, let's conquer the rest of it. So they went all throughout the Middle East and they conquered it. The Mediterranean, though in the Middle East as well. They went all the way up to Spain and Great Britain. They went down here, they went over here, basically conquered all of the Mediterranean Sea and basically called the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea. So they basically said, we're the rulers of the sea now, we control it. And so the biggest things when it comes to these conquered cities is most of the cities, some cities were sacked and burned, but most of them became provinces and became under the rule of Rome. Some people were given citizenship, though not many, but most had to give some kind of tribute, whether that be to send back resources like food or items, or to send soldiers to be in their army. They also blended a lot of culture. Rome is a very blended society. There isn't a lot of we're Romans or not Romans. It's very much, well, we're just going to take everyone in and all customs and just make it ours. And so they took on gods, customs, and cultures and kind of blended it all together to become what would be considered Rome. Okay, sorry. Here you go. However, while they were out conquering everything, there's a lot of strife that was going on back at the home front. So with these provinces kind of developing, there was a lot of corruption that would also take place. People could bribe their way into citizenship and do all of these things, making it really easy for corruption to develop, especially in in the home front of Rome. Because the men were all fighting at war, women had to work in the fields, which often would cause a lot of strife in the home and cause a lot of issues with like people not having enough food or resources. Farmers began to deal with a lot of poverty, especially as latifunadi were established. Latifunadi were Roman estates that produced goods such as grain, olive oil, and wine. And basically they were big farms owned by wealthy landowners and then run by slaves, making it very difficult for local farmers to be able to produce goods and to kind of care for themselves, which produced a huge wage gap, causing a lot of strife. This strife would result in riots, revolts, and reforms. So let's talk about those reforms. So first off, the farmers would riot because of the poverty and wage gap. The slaves would revolt, and the conquered cities would begin to become unrested and begin to say, you know, if they're going to revolt, we might rebel as well. A lot of reasons, because with the riots back then with the farmers, there wasn't as much maintenance and overview, made it really easy for these revolts to take place. And what happened is these two brothers, the Gracchi brothers, were like, you know what, there needs to be some changes. And so first off, there was the brother Tiberius. He wanted to re-elect tribunes, which hadn't been done in a year. So tribunes that we talked about before about these plebeian leaders hadn't been re-elected in years. So it's kind of a lot of corruption that was going on behind there. So like we should re-elect them, and as well as distribute land back to the plebeians so that they have their own wealth back. However, he was ended up killed by a Senate created riot in order to silence him. His brother Gaius, about 10 years later, would come on the scene and be like, would reopen a lot of the reforms his brother tried to do, as well as try to extend citizenship to those citizens in those conquered to the people that's in the conquered area and make them citizens. His followers were killed a lot by the Senate and other people, and he ended up committing suicide himself because of all of this. This whole period of strife would cause a bunch of civil wars to pop up and end up splitting the empire, the republic, in many ways. And this whole concept of a personal army would start to develop. Soldiers, instead of siding in loyalty to Rome, would have loyalty to generals or leaders in the army. This would allow for Julius Caesar to come to power. So in 59 BCE, Julius Caesar would be elected as consul of Rome. He would form an alliance with Pompey as well as Carsus, and this would form the first trifold, which would be a trifold kind of alliance taking place with Roman leaders, and this would happen throughout Rome. You would have this like kind of three-group tri-head power structure. Julius would go on campaign with his soldiers and gain both military strongholds throughout the Mediterranean as well as loyal soldiers. And he actually would bring back his soldiers, forming this huge personal army. And the Senate was really worried about this. They're like, we don't like this. And so they basically told Caesar, you need to disband your army or you can't come back to Rome. And Caesar was like, I can do whatever I want. And so he starts to march on Rome. And these leaders flee. They run away. And Caesar's like, I'm gonna run after you. And so he runs after them basically. And he ends up conquering Rome, Spain, Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, basically all of the Mediterranean. And then he declares himself dictator for life. And he says, Vini, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, and I conquered. And he basically was like, I'm the leader now. I can do whatever I want. And so he gained absolute power and electoral control. It was still technically called a republic, but nobody really had any say. People still had the right to vote, but Caesar would present, these are the candidates you can vote for. You can't vote for anyone else, basically handpicking everyone for all the offices. He would form control and power on basically everything and have final say on all laws, all verdicts, and everything that happened. And even though he did take over this way, he was loved by the people. He formed holiday and parades, festivals, and made it fun and enjoyable to be part of Rome. He developed reforms, lowered taxes, structured the government better, distributed land and food to the people. He established his own calendar, which would make it easier for farmers to have seasonal cycles and make it easier for the government to run on schedule. And just for most of his time as a dictator for life, he would actually help restructure Rome in a lot of really beneficial ways. However, he was very much feared by the Senate. And even though he never declared himself king or ruler or rex or anything to say that he's the one in absolute control, everyone knew he was. And he would actually be betrayed by one of his closest friends and stabbed to death in the Senate, which would allow for his great nephew and adopted son Octavian to kind of step up. So after Caesar's death, they thought, the Senate would go back to normal, the Republic would go back to was, but it did not. The Republic was in chaos. People were unsure how to rule, and there was very little structure. And so Caesar's adopted son Octavian would come on the scene, and he would be like, you know what? I'm going to do this in my adopted father's place. He would organize the soldiers who were loyal to Caesar. He would form alliances with Mark Antony and this guy named Lepidus, forming another one of those trifolds. He would take down all of Caesar's assassins in the Senate, and then he would go around and betray those two alliances he made. He would force Lepidus to resign, and he would basically make Mark Antony out to be a traitor who sided with the quote unquote queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, and basically some people think that he might have had them killed. Others say that they committed suicide, but Antony and Cleopatra, after a while, would commit suicide, would somehow die, resulting in Octavian being the sole ruler and become the new leader of Rome. And while Julius Caesar never declared himself to be absolute leader, Octavian was a little different. Octavian, quote unquote, returned power back to Senate in Rome and was renamed Caesar Augustus. Augustus meaning favored by the god, by the Senate in this honor of this, doing all of this. However, he controlled most of the powers, and he declared himself the princeps, which means first citizens, which basically would become what we know as the first emperor of Rome. He would establish all the building blocks of what we know as the Roman Empire. He would build roads and aqueducts, which are the amazing water systems that would help allow for irrigation and sewage systems to work better. He would conquer and establish Egypt as a province, and actually help unblock the Nile where it had been blocked for many, many years, allowing for the Nile irrigation to flow back out, which would produce so much food that Rome had a surplus, had no idea what to do with all this food, even though it had spent years unable to provide enough food for all these people. Just by unblocking and reestablishing the Nile irrigation, he basically restructured the whole food crisis and made it 100% viable for them to live literally off of this one piece of land. He developed the Roman census, which allowed for tax reform because they knew where every people was and where they lived and how much land they had, making it much easier to kind of structure taxes. And basically, as his time as Princeps, the first citizen, or what we know as the first emperor of Rome, he established the Roman quote-unquote golden age. And he would, and we'll talk in our next video about what this looked like and how this kind of developed into what we know as Rome today. But really his time as emperor kind of kicked off a series of emperors much like him. So he would become the first emperor as what's called the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And after him would be his stepson Tiberius, who was extremely unpopular. They actually threw a party when he died. Then after him was Gaius Claudia, who was both hated and feared by the Roman people. They did not like him at all. And then after him was his young son Nero. Nero was actually, for the first half of his reign, had really good advisors who basically reigned on his behalf, and it was really, really good period of time. However, when he became old enough to rule in his own stead, he became a cruel, malicious, and terrifying human being. The concept of a Roman candle, a human being covered in wax and burned alive, a Roman candle, was developed by Nero. So he was not a good guy. Nero would, after Nero, you would have a series of wars that would break out, and Vespasian would become the next emperor, and he would establish the Flavian dynasty, and after him would be his sons Titus and Domitian. None of them really did a lot, but they also were kind of stable. They didn't do a lot of change, but they didn't really cause any problems either. Domitian would be killed, most likely by an assassin, but after him would be a period of 5 really good emperors, including Trajan, who would expand Rome even more than already had been, Hadrian, who would build military defenses all the way up to what is modern-day Great Britain, and Marcus Aurelius, who would be one of the wisest Roman emperors and write the book, the Meditations, which was a book of philosophy based on Greek thought, and kind of established that knowledge-based idea that Greece had for so long, kind of bring it into Roman structure as well. This whole period of time between Augustus and Marcus Aurelius would be known as Pax Romana, or Roman peace. But even though it was called Roman peace, it was far from peaceful. They often conquered nations all over the place. This led to a lot of rebellions and corruption. You had bad leaders like Nero and very wise leaders like Aurelius. And there would be huge gaps in wealth, power, and education, causing a lot of strife. At the same time, all of these conquered people would allow for a mixing of cultures, ideas, values, and knowledge, but it create this period of growth that humanity would still kind of recognize today, allowing for a legacy to kind of flourish and exist even till today. We'll talk more about that legacy and what it is and how it looks like in our next video. But for now, just think about this whole period of time, almost 800 years of Rome's kind of establishment, all the way back to our, Roman myth of the 2 brothers, Remus and Romulus, and the wolf, all the way to Octavian establishing the Roman Empire and kind of beginning the Roman Pax Romana that we know today. Okay, before you leave, think about all of the concepts we just talked about: the Roman myth, laws, values, and these conquered people, the wars, the Punic Wars, and the rise of the Roman Republic, Julius and rebellion, Augustus Caesar as the first emperor of Rome, and the many emperors that followed him, and all of this accumulating in the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Before you leave, think about the word republic, res publica, or public thing. How did the Roman Republic create the foundation of what we know as the modern day West? Think about this question and complete your video assignment. When you're done, have a great day, y'all. This is your only video for this week. If you need any help, feel free to give me an email, phone, or call, or come to my office hours. Bye for now.